All right, 2 o'clock. And I guess there's just 3 of us. The subject that I'm going to be covering is the buyer's agency agreement. And it is super important. And I fear that nobody realizes how important this is, except for the 2 of you. So I'm glad you're both here, Patricia and Gloria. Can you put on your video so I can see you, and then have your microphone ready in case you have a question or something as I go through this with you?
That's my video. I came home from the gym. I got to take my video back off.
You look fine, but if you're comfortable with it off, that's okay. It's up to you.
That's
There's Gloria. Yay. Okay, so this is the reason this is so important is because in the recent 30 years, there's been just a couple of really significant changes to our laws, rules, and forms, just a couple of them. And this is one of them. And so I guess I'm going to somehow have to stress the importance of this to other people. But as I said, I'm just glad that you guys are here with me, you ladies are here with me, so that I can start to get people ready for the big changes that are coming on October 3rd. So on October 3rd, we will have 4 new forms that have been revised as far as the commission agreements go. And they are Form 1A, the listing contract, Form 21, which is the purchase and sale contract, Form 41A, which is the buyer agency agreement that I'm going over with you today, and then Form 41C. And so those 4 forms are changing. The whole compensation part of it is changing, and so I'm trying to make people aware of it and why and how to prepare for this big change on October 3rd. The reason it is rolling out so early is because it is such a major thing, and the MLS is trying to give us plenty of time to prepare everyone for this change that's coming. So as designated brokers, we're trying to get the word out to all of the brokers, as to how they should be doing business. But the thing that stood out to me for this class, the thing that stood out to me the most was that in all the explanations the lawyers have been giving about these new changes, the number one thing they've been saying is, if your agents are using 41A now, and if they're comfortable using Form 41A now, then this change is not going to be too much of a shock. It's going to be a very smooth transition for those agents. But if they are not using Form 41A, it could be a real shock to their system. And so I guess that's why the first thing I want to do is hold this class that I'm holding right now. Dolly, you can come back on so I can see you. The reason I want to show, here you are. The reason I want to do this with you now is to get you comfortable with both the Form 41A, the buyer agency agreement, and comfortable with the dialogues you're going to need to have ready to use for that form. Okay. So, so first of all, let me just give you a brief history of how buyer's agency has worked in our state of Washington. But the beginning, from the very beginning of having real estate, period, as a brokerage service, everyone, as far as the agents go, all agents and brokers all represented the seller all of the time. There's no such thing as buyer representation. It didn't exist. It was just what was called a sub-agency. So if a real estate agent had a buyer that they were showing properties to through the MLS, the thought was that anything the buyer saw and wanted to write an offer on, the offer would be written, but the agent who was writing the offer for that buyer was always representing the seller. Everyone represented the seller. Right? Seems weird now, but back then it was just like, well, sure, if I go into Sears and I'm looking for some socks. Oh, Sears out of business now. I go into JCPenney and I'm looking for some socks, and going through, the clerk comes over and starts helping me find socks. Okay, who is that? Who is that clerk representing? JCPenney, not me. They're helping me, but they represent JCPenney, right? JCPenney's paying them. They're representing, JCPenney, and that was the thought. So that seemed to work for everybody. And then in the early to mid 90s, there started to be some litigation and some issues that were arising around the country. And they were major issues. And so much of the country, trying to get ahead of the game in this, started to separate out and define buyer's agent, what buyer's agency was. And we actually had a law that was enacted here in 1997 called the Broker Agency Disclosure Act that in 1997 enabled us clearly to represent a buyer but get paid by the seller. Even though we would represent the buyer and have specific duties toward that buyer. The seller, who we're not representing, would end up paying us a commission. So they made a distinction in that, saying that the compensation and the representation were not related. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you represent. You can get paid by the other party. Okay, so since that time, that was in 1997, since that time, things have gone along pretty smoothly. But what had been happening now is that we have this Form 41A, which I hope you all have handy there, that is the buyer agency agreement, and the only thing we had to make sure we were going to get paid a commission was we had to make sure that the buyer signed the buyer agency agreement with us. That was the initial thought. As time has rolled on, it's become an issue where the buyers have always wanted to know, why am I going to sign that agreement? What's the benefit to me, right? Anytime someone signs a contract, they want to know, what's the benefit to me? I know you want me to sign it because I know you want to get paid. But what's the benefit to me? So, since 1997, I worked a lot on teaching dialogues and teaching the concepts of how to show value to the buyer who's signing the buyer agency agreement. Why do they want to sign that? So my favorites that I've used, my favorite, I should say, is the license law. So this license law, this Agency Act of 1997 that I was just telling you about, actually is really cool. If you read it and think about what it means, if you represent somebody like the buyer, then you owe the buyer 5 specific duties in addition to the 7 general agency duties you would owe for anyone. You owe 5 specific duties, and 2 of those duties are loyalty. One is loyalty, and the other one is confidentiality. So the confidentiality is obviously important to a buyer. They sometimes don't know what loyalty means. So I find that that's a great part of your presentation when you're talking to a buyer about signing the buyer with you, because you can actually let that buyer know that loyalty means that as your agent, I have to put your interests always ahead of my own interests and ahead of the interests of anybody else, even a relative of mine, even whatever. I've got to put your interests first. And so that means, let me give them a specific example. That means, let's say that a screaming deal hits the market, just an absolute screaming deal. And just having something hit the market's a big thing, but to have a screaming deal at the market with a great price, right? What that means is that I can't even buy it for myself unless I first go to you and see if you want to buy it. And if you don't want to, then I can buy it myself, but I always have to put your interests ahead of mine. If I've got a cousin, a good close friend of mine who's told me to keep my eye out for great deals, but we have no agency relationship formally signed, but you and I do, I've got to put your interests ahead of theirs, and I'm going to bring it to your attention first. So then the question that I oftentimes get is, but can't you represent someone without actually having a signed contract? Of course you can. Yeah. So with buyers, you can have an agency relationship without having a signed contract. But the difference and the point is, I'm not going to represent you, and I'm letting you know up front, I'm not going to represent you or any buyer ever unless I have a signed agency agreement. So maybe the law would allow it, but I won't. So in order for me to represent you, I've got to have a signed agreement. It's going to be prima facie evidence that I am representing you and putting your interests ahead of my own interests. I am not going to ever do anything to actually what's in writing between us. And that's something you as a buyer should always want to have, is to make sure that whoever you're working with is representing you in all ways and putting your interests first. And then there's that confidentiality thing that's very important too, which means that in representing you, anything you talk to me about, anything I learn about you, or though that's all confidential information. I'm never going to divulge that to anybody else because I have that duty of confidentiality. Now, as a buyer, you're going to want to always hold your agent to those things. Just those 2 simple things I just mentioned, confidentiality and loyalty. They mean the world to you. And so you always want to make sure you have those. And so what I'm saying to you now is that if you're my buyer, I'm saying that if you want these things, I'm happy to deliver them with a written agreement. And that written agreement is going to bind both me and you. And so it's going to bind me to doing those two really important things, confidentiality and loyalty. And it's going to hopefully bind you to make sure that I get a commission. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to have to pay me the commission. What it means is that you're going to stay with me loyal. We're going to stand side by side with our arms locked to make sure that you get what you want and I get what I want. What I want is to get paid for my work, but I don't want you to have to pay it. So all I need is for you to cooperate with me to make sure that I do get paid. Do you have a problem? Are you okay with me getting paid as long as you don't have to pay me? Is that okay with you? I would ask that question. Because if they say, well, yeah, I don't want you to get paid, you got the wrong client. You don't want to work with someone. If someone tells you that they want you to work for free and that they don't care if you get paid or not, I would not work with that person. But you want to test those waters and ask the question and make sure that this person is willing to, work with you, not against you, to ensure that you get paid. So back in 1980, and I remember specifically, it was 1987, in the winter time of 1987, I went to Cancun, Mexico. And I went there for a really long stay, and so I was relatively bored. I mean, I enjoyed the sun, but yeah. So I went down to the local market, the artisan market, where they sell a lot of handmade things and just knickknacks, things you can buy and take home and decorate the house with, things like that, right? So I spent a lot of time just shopping around and looking around and stuff, and I kind of had fun also. I spoke Spanish fluently, but I liked to speak English, all the time. And people would see this big, tall, dumb gringo and think that I could speak Spanish, and it would always be a shock to them when they find out I could speak Spanish. But I just had fun, just shopping around, meeting people, talking to people in the shop. During the course of a couple of weeks there, I had collected these onyx fruits, and I wish I had one with me, but one of these onyx fruits that I didn't have. I had a collection of all of them except for one, which was a banana. That was the only thing I was missing, was the onyx banana. And when I was leaving to go home, I was packing everything up, and I was realizing, oh my gosh, I've got this onyx bowl, all these onyx fruits, but it's missing a banana. You can't have a fruit bowl without a banana, both for the color and shape, right? So I thought, I know I saw one back at that market. So I went back to the market, which was a huge market. I mean, there were over 100 shops there. And I was racing through trying to find the banana. I couldn't find it anywhere. And so I went through the total shop, got to the other side, and I was standing there scratching my head, wondering, where did I see that? And this little local guy comes walking up to me and he goes, can I help you? I said, well, I doubt it. And he said, well, I think I can. What are you looking for? And I said, well, I'm looking for an onyx fruit, an onyx banana. And I haven't been able to find one. I thought I had seen one, but I'm missing it, and I'm flying out really soon, and I need to get it before I go. And he smiled at me and he says, well, you know what? I'm a broker. And as a broker, I can help you get that onyx banana like that, because I know the inventory. I know everything that's in these shops, over 100 shops, and I know every one. And I can find you, and I know I can find you exactly what you want. And you don't have to pay me, because I have gone to each one of these shop owners, and we have worked out an agreement that out of the proceeds of what they get from you or any buyer like you, I will be given a portion of they will give me some money. So it's not going to be your money anymore. You'll have given them the money for the item. And out of the money they have, they're just going to give some to me. They pre-agreed to give some to me. And I was just like dumbfounded. I thought, oh my gosh, that's exactly what we do. That's exactly what we do. And sometimes the buyer thinks it's coming out of their pocket. And when I went, and when he took me right to the shop that I would never have found, because it was facing away on the opposite street, and he took me right there and showed me where I was on the way there. He told me how to negotiate for the best price and everything, talked to me about tactics and everything. And I went over there and negotiated, got my onyx fruit to bring back. And I, as I was leaving, I turned around and I watched her drop some coins into his hand. So I got paid. I didn't pay him. And that wasn't my money that paid him. I just bought a fruit. Then that person who sold the fruit had a pre-agreement with this person, and the money was exchanged, right? This was given to him as payment. Okay. And I would just, again, in concept, was blown away because it made it all so very clear to me what it is that we do. Well, who it's not so clear for anymore, because it's still vague to buyers. Buyers are still not understanding this, and they're confused by it, all right. But the Department of Justice for the United States of America has basically declared war on brokerages, so to speak. They've said it's an antitrust law violation. We have antitrust laws in this country, and the way you guys are doing business is an antitrust law violation. And we're going to put an end to it. Either you guys voluntarily are going to make some changes, or we're going to make it happen through a major federal lawsuit. So our Northwest MLS is making those changes. And those forms that are going to change, those 4 forms that are going to change with all the compensation is going to hit the MLS on October the 3rd. So when you go to pull up one of those forms on October 3rd, I just don't want anyone in our organization to be shocked or surprised to see the compensation paragraphs be something completely different, because they are completely different. But if you have been using this buyer agency agreement, Form 41A, and if you've been using the right dialogues up to this point, it's going to be a really smooth transition for you. And I'm going to do a meeting tomorrow for our team meeting. I'm just going to speak at our team meeting for briefly about some of the highlights of what I'm talking to you about here today. And then on the 4th of August, which is a Thursday at 11 o'clock a.m., I'm going to do a full-blown meeting about these new forms and the changes in these new forms. And so, you probably want to mark those on your calendar and make a point of attending this August 4th meeting.
What time?
At 11 o'clock a.m. And then tomorrow at the team meeting at 11:30, I'm going to go over a few of these things, and maybe more specifically about Rule 222, which is the new Northwest MLS legal bulletin. 222, you'll want to read. It's out. I've had it for a couple of weeks, but it just came out today for the brokers. And so you're going to want to take a look at it. Again, that's Rule 222, the Northwest MLS legal bulletin. And that's going to give you sample copies of the forms. It's going to give you a lot of explanation about why. It's going to have frequently asked questions, a lot of cool stuff that's going to help you gain an understanding of that. So for this class, though, today, I'm going to both tell you how our current form Form 41A works, and then tell you what the change is going to be on October 3rd, when the new one comes out, which will not be Form 41A, it'll be Form 41. Period. And on that new Form 41, it's going to have, instead of paragraph 4, which is what we have now for our compensation paragraph on our Form 41A, it's going to have a paragraph 5. It's going to have various scenarios for compensation. So one of the things on our current form on 41A, which is paragraph 4, that agents have been making a mistake about is, first of all, they check, it says this agreement creates an either exclusive or non-exclusive agency relationship, and you choose one of those. Under the new form, you're not going to have a choice. It's going to be an exclusive relationship, period. If you want to have a non-exclusive agency relationship, you have to use a different form. But the Form 41 is going to be the form that we'll typically be using, and it'll be a it'll be an exclusive agency relationship. And then it says, in our current form, it says buyer shall pay firm compensation as follows. Either a percentage amount or a dollar amount. And so typically the best thing to put in there has been a percentage, to put in 3% or 2.5%, right? So, and that's all that should be put in there right now. Because if you write anything else in there, then it really negates the whole contract, makes it of no worth whatsoever. So what you want to do is just put in the amount. So you put in the 3% or 2.5% or whatever it is that you have agreed to do for your buyer commission. And so the problem is that it says buyer shall pay firm compensation as follows. Buyer shall pay. How's that like my little guy helping me out there at the market in Cancun, right? He didn't say he was going to pay. He didn't say I had to pay him up front, did he? No. Well, the difference is that we're dealing with contract law here. Contract law here says that for a contract to be valid, both parties have to bring in consideration. And the consideration that we're bringing in is our technology and expertise in finding the property, and the compensation that they're bringing in, if they're not going to agree to pay us a commission, there is nothing. They're bringing nothing. So for the contract to be valid, it has to say the buyer is going to pay us that consideration, right? But if you go down to paragraph A right below it, the purpose of paragraph A right below that was to modify that and explain how the Northwest MLS works. And that if the buyer goes through you and buys something in our MLS that's listed, then the seller has made that pre-agreement, just like my friend in Cancun, Mexico, had made with me, right? That, hey, you won't have to pay me. I've made a pre-agreement with the seller. After the deal's done, the seller will pay me out of their proceeds or however they want to pay me. Okay, and as long as that happens, you buyer are not going to have to pay me a penny. Seller. The seller has pre-agreed to pay. So one of the big changes coming up with this Legal Bulletin 222 and this rule changes in the MLS and everything else is that the way we've always done it, since I laid out kind of the historical buildup of this, was that back in 1997, when that agency law passed for Washington State here and is now part of our RCWs, it was providing for the listing agent to receive, and I'm just going to say numbers for purposes of an example. So the seller would receive a 6% commission and share 3% of it with the buyer's agent, buyer's broker who brought the buyer, wrote the deal. Now that's going to change as of as of October 3rd. As of October 3rd, now it's going to be different. Now the seller is going to have an agreement with their agent to pay them 3% commission, which they keep all of. And the seller, that same seller, is going to have an agreement with you, the buyer's agent, to pay you 3%. So we're not doing a pass-through through the other agent anymore, through the other brokerage anymore. Now the seller just pays 3% to each directly. Okay, so that may not seem significant to you, and maybe in effect it's not going to be significant, but that's a huge change just in concept from the way it's been all the way until now. So that's the first thing we've got to prepare for, is getting used to the sellers making an agreement with their agent who they list with, and the sellers making an agreement with me, who's representing the buyer. And if I don't have this buyer agency agreement, I've got nothing. I've got to have this buyer agency agreement signed by the buyer, so that when I go to negotiate for the buyer's on the buyer's best behalf, we're also going to include a compensation agreement from 41C to have my compensation paid, right, in every transaction. So a big difference that's going to happen starting October 3rd is we're going to have to negotiate every time with every party. We've got to negotiate our commissions, and they changed the term from commission to consideration. So that's another change that's going to take place as of October 3rd, is they won't even, the word commission will not even exist. It'll just be compensation, is all they'll say. So our compensation is going to be negotiated all the time with the sellers, with buyers. We utilize our agreement with the buyers to make sure we get paid, through the seller. Nothing's going to really change as far as that goes, but we've just got to make sure, if we're not using the buyer agency agreement yet, we've got to make sure we're using it from here on with every buyer. There's really no excuse to not be using it, and you're going to want to make sure that you are, so that it complies with these new forms and new rules as they come into effect on October the 3rd.
I have a question, John.
Sure.
So there is a part where it says on the current form that any party can dismiss the agreement, for any reason. Agent can do that, or the buyer can do that. So is there any change to that? Or is there any way the NAR is like, you think they're working on it, getting in and foreseeable? Because I've heard from different people which had happened to them. They would have been working with them, and they show the home, and then client turns around, either goes working directly with the listing agent or the new construction. They get the kickback or whatnot, so
right.
Is there a way to get that enforced?
Yeah, so you're talking about the current paragraph 3. So the current paragraph 3,
Correct.
it's talking about the term of the agreement. It says basically that the agreement's for 120 days, unless filled in differently, for 120 days, and that that the buyer's under no obligation to the firm except for those obligations that exist under the exist at the time of termination. So it does say at the time of termination that's going to happen. So why was I thinking that was the paragraph that said that either party could terminate? That is the paragraph. Let's think so. Or there it is. So it terminates within 120 days, or on written notice of either party. So either the buyer or the broker can terminate the agency agreement. But anything that's been done up to that time, there's still a commission owing. So to answer your question, Dolly, if you showed a property to the buyer or brought it to their attention.
So for example, let's say if somebody had already shown the property. Right. So if they have already showed them the property and brought it to their attention, you found out that they end up working with the new construction builder directly or the listing agent directly, how you can enforce that?
Yeah, you kind of cut out. So that's why I was looking at you funny, Dolly, because you're cutting out your.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm in the office. I'm sitting in the office here.
Yeah, that Transformers sound, to your voice. But to answer your question, which I think I got here, is that even if it was a build or new construction, okay, if you show them the property and then they fired you and they said, I don't want you anymore, I'm going to go work with them directly, they still owe you a commission because the service was performed during the contract. And so, yes, that's how it's enforced, but it would have to be enforced through legal means. These things, like I always joke about, there's no magic pixie dust that someone just sprinkles over it to make it happen, to make it right. The only way to make it right is to sue in court. And so, lawyer fees are so high that one of the nice things, one of the skills we try to work on is that skill of getting people to do the right thing without having to go to court to do it, right? And so learning the dialogues
right.
part of what we're doing in this change is learning the proper dialogues and learning the proper dialogues right now with this buyer agency agreement. So that's why, one of the first things I would, do is just really focus, spend some good, hard, solid thinking time on what are the benefits to the buyer for signing this agreement with me. Okay, and so put together those benefits and have those in a dialogue you can use to give them a reason to sign the agreement with you, because otherwise, people are always going to try to stall off signing something unless they know that there's a benefit to them. And this is where you want to show them that benefit. So can it be enforced? Yeah.
Like that's what we do, like during our, during our consult, that's what we provide as a value and show them why they should be signing it, what's the benefit to them. So it shows them the value and then they're signing. But I was just curious that with the new builder, I hear like on our KW group, like, or in the chat or something, I hear from people. So I just was curious about it.
Yeah.
But thank you for clarifying the question. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, and if they've got a buyer agency agreement, and sometimes you don't have to sue, you just throw out the threat of a suit. Just say to the builder, if I have to sue this buyer, that's going to create a stall on your transaction, likely, until the court can sort out, the commission issue here. It might be to our best interest just to have a commission agreement worked out between us, so I don't have to file a suit, right? I think that most people, if they can find a loophole or an out or something that's reasonable, seems reasonable to them, they will oftentimes try to use it because they don't understand how the commission concept works. And we haven't learned how to show value for the commission that we're getting paid. And they think it's just some big sum of money, some big fluff going our way so we can go out and buy a brand new BMW or something, and they don't realize, that we have a ton of business expenses to pay, and we also have to be paid for our time because we earn our living doing this. And so we have to sometimes show them how the commission structure works too, so maybe your brokerage is going to get X amount of dollars. Part of it's going to go to you, or part of it's going to go to your team. Part of it's going to, the teams is going to go to you, all how it breaks out and how much you really get. And I think most buyers are going to be shocked when they realize that, because they, in their own minds, they just think, oh my gosh, Dolly's going to get $12,000. She's going to go out and buy a brand new BMW with that, and they don't realize this is our livelihood. And sometimes a good dialogue to use is to use an example of what they do. So for example, if the buyer is a checker at Safeway, just use the example, say, just for example, I'm not going to take my cart full of groceries and go up to your check stand. And then once you start checking them out, saying, by the way, I'd like you to just cut my tab in half. And I want you to pay out of your salary. Just pay half of my groceries and I'll just pay the other half. How's that sound? Okay, sometimes you've got to give them an example, something they can relate with so they can understand this is your livelihood. And they're taking it away. I think they don't realize that. And I think if they realize that, really, they would be hesitant to even suggest it. So working on those dialogues is really important. Gloria, do you have a question?
Yes, when it's a new construction, I sold some homes in new construction, and always I sign contract with the builder, but also I sign this with my buyer. Is this correct?
Yeah.
Because, okay.
Yeah, at the new construction sites, you almost always have to register your buyer.
Yeah, but I signed the contract also, but I don't know exactly what the contract says about my relation with the builder.
Yeah. Okay, so anyway, so work on this paragraph 4, this compensation, understanding there's no other words you can put in here to modify the agreement. Just put in the amount, explain to the client that in order for this to be a contract, there must be consideration given by each of us. This says you're going to pay the consideration, but then it's modified here explaining how our Northwest MLS works. And that if you use me and we find a house in the MLS, the seller has pre-agreed to pay that commission. Okay, now that part of it is not going to change necessarily. Okay, so there's more complications that I'm going to go over when the time comes. But the main thing you want to get used to right now is using this buyer agency agreement and using the dialogues, and then it's going to be a really comfortable, easy transition for you. The other form that you will use oftentimes is Form 41C, as in cat. So 41C, as in cat, is the brokerage agreement to show the compensation you are going to get in a couple of different scenarios. So this form is going to change also drastically, well, not drastically, significantly on October the 3rd. And so right now it has a couple of scenarios for if the listing had no compensation offered at all by the seller, then this is where you would write in the compensation that's here in the buyer agency agreement. Let's say it was 3. So you would write in the 3 and the percentage here on that first box, check the first box and you put in a 3. And that's saying that, this buyer is making this offer to buy our house, but a part of the offer is you got to pay 3% commission to the agent.
So if we fill the form and put down on the 41A, 2.5 or 3%, because we never know which property the client is going to go mutual in, right? Some have 2.5% compensation, some are 3. So do we need to change that afterwards, what we got into mutual, to change the commission? If it's 3 there, change it to 2.5, or just leave it the way it is?
Well, you can just leave it as long as the buyer is trusting on that. But in the new form, there's actually going to be an area where you can make that change. So yeah, so that's something that's coming October 3rd. So there's going to be some things about the new forms you're going to like, because right now we've had to just kind of cut and paste and doctor up these forms and draw lines and write, you know. Now it's going to have things laid out there for options, what they could do, and you check the box and clarify it and that kind of thing. So it's going to be actually a little bit easier in that regard. But right now, I'm trying to focus a little bit more on right now. You just want to make sure that you know that 3% that was in the buyer agency agreement 41A is going to be transferred over here to the 41C, to that very first paragraph where you check the box. Because right now, because 2 years ago, it was only 2 years ago, they changed our Northwest MLS rules to allow for sellers to offer 0 commission to the buyer's agent. And at the time that came out, over 2 years ago, the agents just freaked out, just completely flipped out. Said, what? They can offer zero commission now? 0 commission to the buyer's agent? And I would say yes. And prior to that, they could offer $1. They could have offered $1 commission to the buyer's agent. That's it. Or $5 to the buyer's agent. That's it. They've always been allowed to do that. Now it's bothering you that they can offer 0. Shouldn't bother you, because this is what I was telling agents, because you got this form 41C now, and you can check that first box and say they're going to pay this commission per the buyer's agency agreement. It's part of their offer. You either accept it or we walk away and find another house. The second box that you have here on 41C is an additional buyer brokerage firm commission. So if the commission they wrote in was only 0.5%, for example, 0.5%, and you want 3%, then you can check that box and you can write in the additional commission the seller is going to have to pay in order to make this deal go through, and make it the 3% you have with your agreed upon with your buyer. One of the things I like about the new forms is that with the new forms and new rules and everything, now, see, in the past, right now, you would have to send a copy if you use the second one or the first one, you'd have to send a copy of your buyer agency agreement along with your offer, so they could see that you really do have that agreement. But starting October 3rd, you're not going to have to show them your buyer agency agreement anymore. I kind of like that, because that's really a contract with you and your buyer. But the seller is wanting to get out of paying a commission, and we're trying to hold them to doing their duty of paying a commission to the buyer's agent, right? So we would check one of those 2 boxes. The third box on this form 41C is that the buyer is that there is no listing at all. It's an off-market deal. Okay, so that's the one you would check, and then you would put in that commission amount. It's going to be in there. Okay, so the new one I think has the new form coming October 3rd has, I think, 5 or 6 boxes choices. So there's a lot of different moving parts here that is actually going to be good, because these are things that people have been just writing in, asking me about, and how do I write this in? And now we've just got some pre-printed wording. Check the box, and it's going to be good to go. So again, that is if you have been using Form 41A, the buyer agency agreement, with all your buyers. And if you've not been using them, you're going to want to start now and getting used to it. And you're going to want to make sure you have all those dialogues down. So you're going to want to get used to doing scripts in the mornings or whatever, you know, and doing these dialogues, getting comfortable with these dialogues, because They're still going to be used with the new forms on October 3rd. And you want to make sure you have this stuff down when that happens. Okay, questions?
Mhm.
Okay, tomorrow at the team meeting at 11:30, I'm going to be just touching on some of these issues we talked about a little bit. Mostly I'm going to be focusing on that legal bulletin 222. But some of this is going to necessarily come into play. But you can't hear it too many times, I don't think, because when this comes around October 3rd, like I say, it's going to be a shock to a lot of agents. And if they haven't gotten used to using the buyer agency agreement. So, so I'm going to, if there's no other questions, I'm just going to quickly let you think about this a little bit. And you can pull up now Legal Bulletin 222 yourselves. And on the Northwest MLS site. And so the purchase and sale agreement is going to change. The buyer brokerage agreement for compensation, the Form 41C, as I said, is going to change. Buyer representation agreement, 41A, is going to change to Form 40, and it's going to have some significant changes. The compensation areas are going to change in both of those. The rules and buyer representation agreement is going to be updated from Northwest MLS. Members of the MLS, meaning the brokerages in the MLS, are going to be allowed now to use their own listing agreements. So we're having some powwows right now about that, if we want to be involved in having our own listing agreement or just use the MLSs. So there'll be more to come on that. The listing agreement, Form 1A, is going to change. It's going to have that compensation change. And it's going to have some new options in that listing agreement for what if a buyer comes to me directly and I'm a dual agent. What is the commission going to be? So in advance, you're going to have to come to an agreement with your seller on that, and also on if a buyer is somebody that you're not representing. They're an unrepresented buyer. They have no agent representing them. What's your compensation going to be as a listing agent in those situations? So those are things we've had to address in the past, but now they've just got to be discussed and done up front at the time of the listing. We're also going to have a change here where an agent or broker from outside of our area in the state of Washington, who's not a member of the Northwest MLS, can show and sell one of our listings if we agree to that. And so that's a provision that's going to be in our forms now. And then the term commission, as I said, is going to be changed to compensation. No longer are they going to use the term commission, it's going to be compensation. So those are just a couple of highlights for you. And again, I'll be touching on some things like this tomorrow in preparation for my August 4th, 11 a.m. meeting. It's going to be upstairs in the training room upstairs, conference room upstairs, and I'll be covering these forms changes. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bye.